You did everything right. You took the job. You saw that little checkbox, enroll me in the 401k, and you checked it, because that's what responsible people do. You felt good about it, maybe even proud, and for years you never touched it again. Here's the question I want you to sit with for a second. Do you actually know what percentage of your paycheck is going into that account right now? Not what you think it is, what it actually is, because there's a number sitting quietly on your pay stub. 3%, maybe 4%, that your employer picked for you. Not because it was good for you, because it was good enough to check a box on a compliance form. And every single month, you don't notice it. You're handing back money your company already agreed to give you. Real money. Money with your name on it. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how much that number has already cost you and how to fix it before your next paycheck. Let's start with the trap nobody warns you about. Let's talk about that number. 3%. It sounds harmless, doesn't it? A number so small it barely registers when you glance at your pay stub between the tax line and the health insurance deduction. Your eyes slide right past it. Most people's do. But here's what nobody tells you when you're handed that enrollment form on your first week at a new job. Half listening, thinking about where the bathroom is and whether your badge photo turned out okay. That 3% wasn't chosen because it's what you need for retirement. It wasn't chosen because someone in HR sat down and calculated what a person your age, with your goals, needs to retire comfortably. It was chosen because it's the minimum threshold that satisfies a federal safe harbor rule. It's the number that keeps the company compliant. It's the number that requires the least effort from you and the least cost from them. Think about that for a second. The default setting on the most important financial account of your working life was built for convenience. Theirs, not yours. And here's the part that stings. Most employers don't just contribute nothing extra. Most of them match. 50 cents on the dollar, dollar for dollar, up to a certain percentage. The details vary, but the principle is the same everywhere. Your company is willing, right now, today, to hand you additional money. Real money. Not a bonus you have to ask for. Not a raise you have to negotiate in some uncomfortable meeting. Money that's already been budgeted, already been approved, already has your name next to it in a spreadsheet somewhere in payroll. All you have to do is contribute enough to unlock it. And if you're sitting at that default 3%, there's a real chance you're leaving a piece of that on the table every single pay period. Not once. Not as a one-time mistake. Every 2 weeks, for years, quietly, without an alarm going off, without a letter in the mail telling you what you missed. That's what makes auto-enrollment such a strange kind of trap. It's not malicious. Nobody's trying to hurt you. In fact, auto-enrollment has done a lot of good. It's gotten millions of people saving who otherwise never would have started. Before these programs, plenty of people simply never got around to enrolling at all. So in that sense, the default did its job. But a default is not a destination. It's a starting point. And too many of us, especially those of us who've been working long enough to trust the system a little too much, mistake the starting point for the finish line. You checked the box. You felt responsible. And that feeling of having handled it, that's the dangerous part. Because it stops you from ever going back and asking the follow-up question, is 3% actually enough? For most people your age, the honest answer is no. Not even close. I think about my own father sometimes, a man who worked the same job for over 2 decades, who trusted that his employer had his best interest in mind, because why wouldn't they? He found out at 58, doing rough math on a napkin, that he'd been leaving money behind since his 30s. Nobody stole it from him. He just never asked the question. That's the quiet cruelty of auto-enrollment. It doesn't fail you loudly. It fails you silently, one paycheck at a time, until one day you're doing the math and realizing how many years you let that default number make decisions for you. So here's where we start turning this around. Not with blame, because there's no use in that, but with a number. A real one. Because in the next part, I want to show you exactly what that gap costs, in dollars, over time. Not a vague warning, an actual calculation, the kind you can hold in your hand and compare to your own pay stub tonight. Because once you see the number, you can't unsee it. And that's exactly the point. There's another layer to this most people never think about. And it has nothing to do with the percentage itself. It has to do with time. In your 20s, missing a point or two of contribution feels irrelevant, because retirement is a distant shape on the horizon. But you're not in your 20s anymore. You're in the stretch where every year of delay carries more weight than it did before, because compound growth needs time to do its work. And time is the one thing none of us get to buy back. So when I call auto-enrollment a trap, I don't mean it as an accusation against the system. I mean it as an invitation, right now, tonight, to go check that number. Not tomorrow. Open that portal you haven't looked at since orientation day. Find the contribution percentage. Ask yourself honestly whether it matches what your employer is actually willing to give you, because the account has been sitting there this whole time, patiently, doing exactly what you told it 3, 5, 10 years ago, when you weren't paying attention. It's not the account's fault. It's the fault of a system built on defaults, and defaults are built for the average person, not for you. You are not the average person. You have your own timeline, your own number, your own version of a comfortable retirement. No setting chosen by a payroll department in a building you've never seen could know what that number is. That's why this next part matters so much. Now let's do the math I promised you. Say your employer matches 50 cents on every dollar you contribute, up to 6% of your salary. You're sitting at the default 3%. That gap, those 3 missing percentage points, isn't just your money you're not saving. It's their money you're not collecting. On a $60,000 salary, that gap is roughly $900 a year in unclaimed match. Add in what that money would have earned sitting in the market instead of sitting in your employer's pocket, and you're looking at somewhere close to $1,200 of real value walking away from you every single year. That's the number in the title of this video. That's not a hypothetical. That's not fear-mongering. That's arithmetic. Sitting quietly on your pay stub, waiting for you to notice it. Now multiply that by 5 years. 10. 15. However long you've been at that default setting. You don't need me to do that multiplication out loud for you to feel it land. But I didn't bring you here just to make you feel bad about a number. I brought you here because there's a second trap sitting right next to the first one, and this one is quieter, sneakier, and in some ways more dangerous, because it disguises itself as responsibility. I'm talking about the target date fund. If you've ever opened your 401k statement and seen something like 2035 fund or 2040 retirement fund, that's what I mean. It's the fund most plans default you into once you do start contributing seriously. The fund with a year in its name, a year that's supposed to line up with when you plan to retire. And on the surface, it sounds smart. It sounds like exactly what you'd want. A fund that automatically adjusts, getting more conservative as you get older, so you don't have to think about it. Set it, forget it, trust the calendar to do the rebalancing for you. For a 28-year-old just starting out, that's often genuinely fine advice. But you are not 28. You're in your 40s, 50s, maybe standing right at the edge of retirement, looking at the horizon instead of hearing about it secondhand. And set it and forget it starts to become a very different kind of risk when the runway in front of you is shorter than the runway behind you. Here's what nobody explains clearly enough. Target date funds are built for the average person retiring in that target year. Not you, specifically. The average person with the average risk tolerance, the average expenses, the average health, the average pension situation, which, if you're honest with yourself, describes almost nobody. You have your own mortgage, or the absence of one. Your own kids, launched or not launched. Your own health picture, your own number you actually need to feel secure. None of that fits into a formula built around a single year printed on a fund name. And then there's the part that really stings once you understand it. The fees. Target date funds often carry higher expense ratios than a simple mix of index funds would. We're not talking about huge numbers on paper, 0.5% here, 0.75% there. It sounds small. It sounds like nothing. The kind of number you'd skip right past on a fact sheet. But over 20 or 30 years, that nothing compounds. A difference of even 0.5% in fees, compounded over decades, can quietly erase tens of thousands of dollars from what you'd otherwise have at retirement. Not because the market did anything wrong. Not because you did anything wrong. Because a fee, small and invisible, was allowed to eat a little bit more of your growth every single year. Silently. The way termites work through a house nobody's watching closely. I think about it like this. Imagine two people, same salary, same contributions, same market returns for 30 years. The only difference between them is a small extra fee one of them didn't know to check for. At the end of those 30 years, one of them has tens of thousands of dollars more, simply because they asked one question the other never thought to ask. What am I actually paying for this? That's not a dramatic story. There's no villain in it. No one stole anything. It's just the quiet math of neglect, playing out over decades, the way it always does. So here's what I want you to actually do, not just hear. Go find your target date fund's expense ratio. It's usually listed right next to the fund name in your plan's portal. Compare it to the lowest cost index fund options available in that same plan. Because most plans do offer them, even if they're buried a few clicks deeper than the default. You might find the difference is negligible. Or you might find you've been quietly overpaying for years for a level of simplicity you didn't actually need. Either way, you'll know. And knowing is the whole point of tonight. I'm not telling you target date funds are bad. For plenty of people, they're a reasonable, decent choice. What I'm telling you is that reasonable for the average person and right for you are two different sentences. And somewhere along the way, we started treating them as the same one. That's the illusion. Not that the fund is wrong, that the convenience quietly replaced the question. Let me ask you something, and take your time answering it honestly. How many jobs have you had since you started working? Really working, since your 20s? 2? 4? 6? If we count the ones early on that barely lasted a year? Now, of those jobs, how many of them offered a 401k? And of those, how many of those accounts do you still know the login information for? If you pause just now, even for a second, you're not alone. You're actually the majority. There is money out there right now. Real, vested, legally yours. Sitting in accounts you haven't logged into in years. Maybe a decade. Maybe longer than some of your current coworkers have been alive. It happens so easily, it barely feels like a mistake when it happens. You leave a job. There's a new job, a new commute, a new set of passwords to remember, a new health insurance card to figure out. The old 401k doesn't come up in conversation. Nobody calls you to remind you it exists. It just sits there, in a plan administered by a company you no longer work for, growing or shrinking with the market, completely disconnected from the rest of your financial life. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you. Most of those old accounts are still charging fees, maintenance fees, administrative fees, sometimes fees that are actually higher than what active employees pay, because the provider knows you're not watching closely anymore. It's not dramatic theft. It's a slow, quiet leak, the kind that never shows up as a single alarming charge, just a fraction of a percent chipped away, month after month, from an account you've mentally already filed under handled. I've talked to people in their 50s who discovered, almost by accident, that they had 3, sometimes 4 of these accounts scattered across old employers. One woman told me she found an old 401k while going through paperwork for her mother's estate. Paperwork that had nothing to do with retirement accounts at all. She'd simply forgotten. Not because she was careless, because life moved forward, and that account didn't move with her. This is where the idea of consolidation comes in, and I want to be careful here, because consolidation isn't automatically the right answer for everyone. But for a lot of people your age, it's worth seriously considering. You generally have a few paths with an old 401k. You can leave it where it is, assuming the plan allows that, and the fees are reasonable. You can roll it into your new employer's plan if that plan accepts rollovers and offers decent investment options. Or you can roll it into an IRA, which often gives you far more control over what you're invested in, and, frequently, lower fees than an old employer plan that's been coasting along without much oversight. What you generally don't want is to simply forget it exists, which, if we're being honest, is the path most of us have unintentionally chosen. There's something almost symbolic about scattered old 401s, if you think about it. Each one represents a chapter of your working life. A job you took, a version of yourself who showed up every day, contributed a little, and then moved on to the next thing. But money doesn't care about chapters. Money just sits there, waiting to either grow for you or get quietly eaten by fees, indifferent to the story around it. Consolidating isn't just a financial move. It's an act of finally closing a loop you left open, sometimes for years, without meaning to. It's looking back at every version of your working self and saying, I see what you started. I'm going to finish it properly now. The tool for finding these accounts, if you've genuinely lost track, is easier to use than you'd think. The Department of Labor maintains a national database specifically for abandoned retirement accounts, and most major providers have search tools where you can look up old plans by employer name. It takes maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes against years of quiet fees and forgotten balances. I'd rather you spend 20 minutes tonight than another decade wondering. And while you're at it, write down the employer names. All of them, even the ones you barely remember. Even the seasonal job or the short stint that didn't work out. Some of the biggest surprises come from the accounts people assume were too small to matter. Small contributions, left alone for 15 or 20 years, have a way of growing into numbers people don't expect. Because here's the truth underneath all of this. None of these mistakes, the auto-enrollment default, the target date fund fees, the forgotten old accounts, none of them happened because you were careless with your money. They happened because the system is built in a way that rewards inattention and quietly profits from it. Nobody sat you down and explained any of this clearly. Nobody made it easy to check. You did the responsible thing at every step you were shown, and the system took advantage of the parts you weren't shown. That's not a reason for shame. It's a reason to go check tonight, before this feeling fades and life gets loud again. Now I want to talk about the fear. Because if you're over 40, there's a version of this conversation that's been sitting quietly in the back of your mind, maybe for years, and it sounds something like this. What happens if I need that money before I'm supposed to touch it? Maybe it's medical bills. Maybe it's a child's education. Or helping a child who's struggling in a way you didn't see coming. Maybe it's a job loss, the kind that hits differently at 50 than it did at 25, when bouncing back felt like it was just a matter of time. Whatever the reason, at some point, almost everyone in this stage of life looks at that 401k balance and thinks, at least it's there if I really need it. And technically, you're right. It is there. But the way most people understand the rules around touching it early is frankly wrong, or at best, incomplete. And that misunderstanding causes two very different kinds of damage. Some people avoid ever touching money they desperately need out of an exaggerated fear of penalties and suffer through situations they didn't have to suffer through. Others touch it carelessly, without understanding what it actually costs, and do far more damage to their future than the emergency itself would have justified. Let's clear this up properly. The headline rule everyone knows is the 10% early withdrawal penalty if you take money out before 59.5. That part is true, broadly. But what most people don't understand is what that 10% actually applies to, and what it doesn't. That penalty is on top of ordinary income tax, not instead of it. So when you pull money out early, you're not just losing 10%. You're paying income tax on that withdrawal as if it were regular salary, on top of the 10% penalty in the same tax year. Depending on your bracket, that combination can easily eat a third or more of what you withdraw before it even reaches your hands. People imagine they're taking out $5,000. What actually lands in their account is closer to $3,000, sometimes less. But here's what almost nobody explains clearly, and it matters enormously for people your age specifically. There are exceptions, real, legal exceptions that can let you access funds without that 10% penalty in certain circumstances, certain medical expenses that exceed a threshold of your income, certain situations involving disability, certain first-time home purchases through an IRA, and a provision that's especially relevant here. If you leave your job in or after the year you turn 55, you may be able to withdraw from that specific employer's 401k without the 10% penalty, even though you haven't hit 59.5 yet. It's sometimes called the Rule of 55, and it exists specifically for people in the exact stage of life you're in right now. Most financial advice aimed at younger audiences never mentions this rule because it's irrelevant to them. But for you, it might be one of the most important sentences in this entire video because it changes the entire calculation around what early actually means for someone approaching the tail end of their career instead of the beginning of it. There's also a subtler mistake people make, one that has nothing to do with penalties at all, and it's this. Even when a withdrawal is technically allowed, penalty-free, that doesn't mean it's free. Every dollar you pull out early is a dollar that stops compounding. It's not just the dollar amount you see leave the account. It's every year of growth that dollar would have generated between now and the day you actually retire. Pulling out $10,000 at 50 doesn't just cost you $10,000. Depending on how many years are left until you actually need that money for retirement, it could cost you 2 or 3 times that in lost growth. Quietly, invisibly, in a way that never shows up on any statement labeled penalty. I say all of this not to scare you away from ever touching the account. Sometimes an emergency really is an emergency, and the money existing at all, penalty or not, is what keeps a family afloat through something difficult. That's not a mistake. That's the account doing exactly what it's supposed to do in a genuine crisis. The mistake is not knowing the actual rules before you're standing in the middle of the emergency, making a decision under pressure with incomplete information, guessing at numbers that turn out to be wrong once the tax bill arrives. The mistake is confusing. I think I know how this works with "I actually checked." So if there's a real possibility you might need to access this money before 59 and a half, not a vague worry, but a genuine possibility given your situation, go find out today exactly which exceptions apply to you, exactly what the tax consequences would look like at your income level, and exactly what a withdrawal would cost you in future growth, not just present dollars. Knowing that now, calmly, on a day when there's no emergency pressing down on you, is worth more than any amount of guessing later. Let's step back for a second, because I want to talk about something underneath all of this that we haven't named yet. Every single thing we've covered so far, the default contribution rate, the fund fees, the forgotten accounts, the withdrawal rules, none of it is complicated in the way people assume. None of it requires a finance degree or hours of spreadsheet work. Every one of these fixes takes 20 minutes, maybe 30. A login, a form, a phone call to a plan administrator who answers these questions all day long and would honestly be relieved to help you, instead of explaining the same thing to someone in a panic at 58. So if none of it is actually hard, why does almost nobody do it? I think the honest answer isn't ignorance. Most people, somewhere in the back of their mind, already sense that something's off. They've felt that flicker of doubt looking at a statement, that small voice asking, "Is this actually working the way it's supposed to?" The reason people don't act on that flicker has less to do with difficulty and more to do with a very specific, very human kind of avoidance. Money, especially retirement money, carries an emotional weight that a phone bill or a car repair simply doesn't. Checking your 401k means confronting a number that either confirms you're on track or confirms you're not. And when you're in your 40s or 50s, that number stops being abstract. It starts feeling like a verdict on decades of decisions you can't go back and redo. So instead of checking, a lot of us do something quietly self-protective. We don't look. Not checking feels safer than checking and not liking what we see. I understand that impulse. I've felt it myself more than once, standing in front of a decision I already half knew the answer to, choosing not to look because looking meant I'd have to do something about it. But here's the thing about that avoidance. It doesn't actually protect you from anything. The number doesn't change because you didn't look at it. The fees don't pause. The forgotten account doesn't stop charging maintenance costs out of politeness. The only thing avoidance protects you from is the discomfort of knowing, and that discomfort, uncomfortable as it is nothing compared to the compounding cost of not knowing. There's a strange kind of relief that shows up on the other side of finally checking, even when the news isn't great. I've seen it in conversation after conversation. People brace themselves for the number, expecting the worst, and what they usually find is something far more manageable than the story they'd been telling themselves in the dark. Not always. Sometimes the number really is worse than expected. But even then, a real number you can act on is infinitely more useful than an imagined one you can only worry about. That's really what this whole video has been about, if I'm honest with you. Not the specific percentages, not the specific rules, though those matter, and I hope you write a few of them down. This has been about the gap between what you assume is being handled and what's actually being handled. That gap is where almost all the damage happens, not because anyone is trying to hurt you, but because silence, left alone long enough, starts to look a lot like consent. You didn't consent to the default contribution rate staying at 3% forever. You didn't consent to paying higher fees on a target date fund you never compared to the alternatives. You didn't consent to 3 old accounts quietly bleeding maintenance charges in the background of a life you've moved on from. You just never got the chance to say no, because nobody ever showed you where to look. Now you know where to look. And I want to be honest about something else, because it matters here. None of this fixes itself in one sitting. You might check your contribution rate tonight and adjust it. You might not get to the old accounts until next weekend. You might sit with the withdrawal rules for a while before they fully make sense. That's fine. That's normal. The goal was never to overhaul your entire financial life in the next hour. The goal was to replace a handful of assumptions with a handful of facts, one at a time, at whatever pace actually fits your real life. Because the version of you at 65 doesn't care how fast you move tonight. They care whether you moved at all. I think about that version of myself sometimes, the one still a ways down the road, looking back at this exact stretch of years, the way you might look back at your 20s now, with a mix of fondness and mild disbelief at how much you didn't know yet. I don't want that future version of me looking back at this decade wondering why I let a solvable problem sit unsolved simply because looking at it felt uncomfortable for an evening. I suspect you don't want that either, or you wouldn't still be listening this far in. So take that seriously. Not as pressure, as permission. Permission to stop pretending the account is fine because you haven't checked, and start treating it the way you'd treat anything else that actually matters to you. With attention, with a little patience, and with the understanding that small corrections made now are worth more than large regrets discovered later. If you're still here with me, this deep into a video about a topic most people scroll past within the first 30 seconds, I want to say something before we keep going. That says something about you. Not everyone sticks around for the parts that require actual thought instead of just a headline. You did. So if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and stick with us. We put out content like this every single day, built for people exactly at your stage of life, dealing with exactly these kinds of quiet financial questions nobody else is answering clearly. And I'll be honest with you about something. A lot of the people who watch these videos tell me the same thing in the comments. They say some version of, "I thought I was the only one who never checked. I thought I was behind everyone else, or careless in some way my friends and co-workers weren't." And every time I read that, I think the same thing back. You're not behind. You're just now paying attention. And that's not the same as being late. Most people never get to this moment at all. Most people go their entire working lives assuming the account is fine because nobody ever told them otherwise. You're already ahead of that. Okay, let's get back to it, because there's one more piece of this I haven't told you yet, and it might be the most important one. Everything we've talked about so far has been about mistakes, things being done to your account without your full awareness. But there's a mistake that runs in the opposite direction too, one that doesn't get talked about nearly as much, and it's this: being so afraid of doing something wrong with your 401k that you end up doing nothing at all for years, out of a kind of financial paralysis dressed up as caution. I've met people like this, careful people who read every article, worry over every decision, and end up so overwhelmed by the number of choices in front of them that they freeze completely, leaving everything exactly as it was set up on day one, not because they decided that was right, but because deciding felt too risky. And ironically, that frozen decision, doing nothing, is itself a decision. It's just an invisible one, dressed up to look like patience. Here's what I want you to understand about that. You don't need a perfect plan tonight. You don't need to become a financial expert. And you don't need to reallocate your entire portfolio by tomorrow morning. What you need is much smaller, much more achievable than that. You need to ask 3 questions, plainly, without judgment. The way you'd ask a doctor about a test result. What am I actually contributing? And is it enough to get the full match? What am I actually invested in? And what am I paying in fees for it? And do I know where every dollar I've ever put into a 401k currently lives? 3 questions. Not a complete financial overhaul. Not a spreadsheet. Not a meet-in with an advisor you've been putting off scheduling. Just 3 honest questions, answered plainly. Tonight, or this weekend, whenever you actually have 20 quiet minutes to yourself. Because here's something I've come to believe after years of watching how this plays out for people. The people who end up genuinely secure in retirement aren't the ones who made the single perfect decision at some magic moment. They're the ones who kept asking these 3 questions over and over, every year or two, adjusting a little each time, staying awake to an account most people let go quiet for decades. It's not brilliance. It's not luck. It's just attention, applied consistently over a long enough stretch of time that the small corrections add up to something that looks, from the outside, like it must have been complicated to achieve. It wasn't complicated. It was just paid attention to. And that's really the whole thread running through everything we've covered tonight. The default rate, the fund fees, the forgotten accounts, the withdrawal rules, the fear underneath all of it. None of it required brilliance. All of it required someone willing to look honestly at a number they'd been avoiding and ask what it actually meant instead of assuming they already knew. You've done that tonight, just by staying this long. What's left now is smaller than you think. There's one more thing worth naming before we move toward the end of this together. All of this, the checking, the adjusting, the 20-minute phone calls, it isn't really about the money. Not entirely. It's about something quieter underneath the money. It's about refusing to let the second half of your working life run on autopilot the way parts of the first half might have. It's about deciding, somewhere around now, that the years ahead deserve the same attention you once gave the years behind you, back when everything felt new and worth paying close attention to. That attention doesn't have to come back all at once. It can come back the way most real changes do, slowly, in small, honest moments. One account, one question, one Tuesday evening at a time. There's an image I keep coming back to, and I want to leave you with it. Picture a man sitting at his kitchen table, decades from now, no laptop open, no spreadsheet in front of him. Just a cup of coffee going cold and a quiet house around him. The kind of quiet that only shows up once the noise of raising a family, building a career, paying down a mortgage has mostly settled. He's not worried. He's not doing math in his head, trying to figure out if he waited too long. He's just sitting there, at peace with a number he checked on, adjusted, and then mostly forgot about, because it had already been handled properly years earlier by a version of himself who decided one ordinary evening that avoidance wasn't a strategy anymore. That man isn't special. He didn't get lucky. He didn't inherit anything, and he didn't stumble onto some secret the rest of us don't have access to. He just asked the 3 questions. Once. And then again a year later. And then again after that, until asking became less of an event and more of a habit. The way checking a smoke detector becomes a habit once you've lived through one too many close calls to trust the silence. You've spent the better part of an hour with me tonight going through the auto-enrollment trap, the real math behind employer matching, the illusion built into target date funds, the old accounts scattered behind you like unopened mail, and the actual rules around touching this money before you're supposed to. None of it was complicated once someone finally walked you through it plainly. That was the whole point. Not to overwhelm you with more to worry about, but to replace a fog of vague anxiety with a short list of specific, doable things. So here's where we leave it. Tonight, or this weekend, whenever you actually sit down with 20 quiet minutes, open that portal, check the number, ask the questions, not because I told you to, and not because of some looming deadline. There isn't one, not really. Beyond the quiet, ordinary passage of time that never announces itself and never waits for you to feel ready. Do it because some version of you, a little further down the road, is already waiting to find out whether tonight was the night things changed, or just another night this got pushed to tomorrow. I can't answer that for you. Nobody can. That part's yours. If this video gave you something worth having, a number you're going to check, a question you're finally going to ask, a small piece of peace you didn't have an hour ago, do 2 things for me. Follow this channel, because we're doing this every single day, walking through exactly this kind of quiet, overlooked corner of financial life that nobody else seems to want to explain plainly. And send this to 5 people. Not because I need the numbers to go up, but because I promise you, there's someone in your life right now, a sibling, a coworker, an old friend from college, sitting on their own version of this exact same mistake, waiting for someone they trust to hand it to them straight. Leave a comment too, and be honest in it. Tell me what part of this actually landed for you, the part that made you pause, even for a second, and tell me what you want me to walk you through next. because there's always another quiet corner of this financial life we're all navigating half-blind, and I'd rather build the next one around what you actually need than what I assume you need. I'll see you in the next one. But before I let you go, one more thing, and then I really will let the silence do the rest. Somewhere in the last hour, you had a moment. I don't know exactly which one. Maybe the number on the pay stub, maybe the old account you suddenly remembered, maybe the withdrawal rule you'd been getting wrong for years without knowing it, where something shifted, even slightly. A small recalculation happened behind your eyes. That shift is the whole reason any of this was worth making. Because here's what nobody tells you about financial peace, real peace, the kind that lets a man sit at a kitchen table decades from now without a single knot in his stomach. It was never about having the most money. Plenty of people with impressive balances still lie awake at night, still avoid opening the statement, still carry that same low hum of not quite knowing that you might have walked in here with tonight. Peace was never about the size of the number. It was always about the relationship you have with it. Whether you're the kind of person who looks or the kind who looks away. Tonight you looked. That's the entire transformation, quiet as it is. Nothing dramatic happened. No fireworks, no life-altering revelation. Just a man or a woman who used to not know, and now knows a little more than they did an hour ago. That's it. That's the whole thing. It doesn't feel like much in the moment. Most real change never does. It felt like just another Tuesday, another video, another 40-some minutes of your evening. But 5 years from now, when that contribution rate has quietly compounded into something meaningfully larger, when those old accounts have been found and consolidated instead of forgotten, when you actually know, calmly, what your options are instead of guessing under pressure, you'll trace it back to a night like this one. An ordinary night where you decided to stop looking away. I won't tell you what to feel about that. I won't wrap it up with some tidy lesson, because you already know the lesson. You knew it the moment I said it out loud, somewhere in the middle of this video. And you've probably known some version of it for longer than that, sitting quietly in the back of your mind, the way these things always do, until someone finally says it plainly. So I'll just leave you here, with the coffee going cold, and the quiet house, and the number you're finally going to go check. I'll be here.